Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our conversation with Brian Steinwurtzel and Will Lee. Today's event is a partnership between Fordham University's Real Estate Institute, Columbia University's GSAPP, and the Counselors of Real Estate. And we've been getting together for a number of years to give you the inside track on the real estate market in New York City and around the world. I'm Andy Murray, Associate Dean in Fordham's School of Professional and Continuing Study, and I invite you to check out our website to learn about our graduate and certificate programs in real estate. Our online classes start next week, and we also have a new course in social media for real estate. We'll put the links to those programs in the chat. A little housekeeping. This event will be recorded, and if you'd like a link to the recording, just email us at realestate@fordham.edu. Also, we'll be taking questions, so as they come to mind, please feel free to type them in the chat below. It's my pleasure and honor to introduce Neil Madsen, Chair of CRE's New York Metropolitan Chapter and Principal and Founder of Madsen Advisors. Neil not only provides real estate counseling and asset management for his clients, but he also helps guide us at Fordham as a member of the Real Estate Institute's Executive Advisory Committee. Neil, thank you for your support to REI and for kicking us off today.
My pleasure, and thank you, Andy. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you today. And as Andy said, for the last several years, Fordham University, Columbia University, and the Counselors of Real Estate have co-hosted a gathering each fall high above Lincoln Center to discuss the most pressing issues facing the real estate industry. This year, for obvious reasons, we can't gather in person, but I'm so pleased that we're able to do this virtually. For those of you who might not know us, the Counselors of Real Estate is an organization of real estate professionals who provide intelligent, unbiased real estate advice that achieves the best results for our client or employer. As the most respected real estate specialists in the industry, counselors work on the most complex and important projects and are known for innovation and creative problem solving. So if that sounds like the advice you need or the kind of organization you'd like to be part of, please contact me or Hugh Kelly or Bill Lee or any other counselor you might know for more information. Today we have an exciting program for you, and I have the pleasure of introducing our moderator and fellow counselor, Bill Lee. Bill Lee is a senior managing director in the capital markets group at Newmark. He focuses on investment sales in the New York metropolitan area, advising clients on the marketing and sale of investment properties and development sites. Bill also advises major public sector clients and, like a true counselor, has taken on some immensely complex assignments. Significant recent projects include Empire State Development's public-private partnership for the redevelopment of Manhattan's Moynihan Station, the MTA's acquisition of property to expand and redevelop Penn Station's Long Island Railroad Concourse, and the U.S. Department of Transportation's assessment of collateral backing of $526 million TIFIA infrastructure loan. Prior to joining Newmark, Bill worked at Deutsche Bank and Cushman & Wakefield in both real estate equity investment and commercial brokerage. Bill is a counselor of real estate, serving as vice chair of the New York Chapter Board of Directors. He's also a CFA charter holder and serves on the President's Advisory Council of his alma mater, LaSalle University. He has also served as an adjunct professor of real estate at CUNY's Baruch College. In addition to being a graduate of LaSalle University, Bill also holds an MBA from Duke University. Bill, welcome.
Thank you. Great. It's a pleasure for me to introduce Brian Steinwurtzel. Brian is the co-CEO of GFP Properties, a family-run, one of the largest family-run real estate groups in New York City. I would like to make a quick rundown on GFP before we get into some questions with Brian. Since its first purchase of 235th Avenue in 1958, a property that the firm still owns, and you may recognize it for its rooftop, which appears each year on the Macy's fireworks display. GFP Properties has grown to become one of New York City's leading commercial property owners. The firm currently owns 55 buildings totaling more than 12.8 million square feet. GFP's properties include some of New York City's most recognized properties, among them the Flatiron Building, the Film Center Building at 630 9th Avenue, 515 Madison Avenue, 1560 Broadway, and 40 Worth Street. In addition to managing and leasing its own properties, GFP and its more than 600 full-time professionals provides management and leasing services for third-party owners of over 20 buildings totaling 4 million square feet. The firm's combined portfolio totals over 75 buildings and nearly 17 million square feet. Now in its sixth decade and led by its third generation of the Gorell family, the firm is steeped in a long tradition of emphasizing exceptional service to its over 2,500 tenants. GFP remains true to its New York City roots, serving the city's nonprofit community, which makes up over 1/3 of the portfolio's tenants. The firm is also a leading benefactor of many of these organizations. Brian, thanks for joining us this morning. I'd like to go through your background a little bit so that for the benefit of many of the students on here, so maybe you could provide some advice, some career advice, how to get started in the career and how you built to your current position now. Thanks for joining us. Great.
It's my pleasure. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you just fine.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Bill. And Bill, you know, I didn't know your entire resume, but that's very impressive. And I should have known it because, you know, Bill and I have been in the trenches on a lot of deals together, and there's no one I'd rather have, you know, with me trying to figure out what the right analytics are through these properties and all the different elements of trying to understand the acquisition, the debt financing, the structure of the tenants. So it's a pleasure, Bill, to be here with you on a Zoom call now.
Thanks, great. That's great, Brian. And Neil makes it sound so much better. He's got that voice that works so well. Thank you. I know that you started your career at PwC and then moved to Treon. What are the kind of skills that you developed early on in your career that's really helped you as you kind of progress through?
Sure. Yeah, sure. So like at the end of the, I'll sort of maybe start with this. At the end of the day, I ended up in a family business. I can tell you, people say to me, did I always know I was going to do it? And, you know, when I was a kid, growing up in the, you know, late 80s and early 90s, the last thing I wanted to do was go into real estate because at that time, you know, real estate was really going through a crisis. And the only real memory I have of that period of time was my grandfather and my uncle fighting, and my mom and my dad sort of trying to figure out how to like navigate the, you know, the family, you know, dinners, Thanksgivings, holidays, whatever it was. You know, and it's interesting that we sort of find ourselves in a little bit of a challenging time. I'm curious how my kids will reflect back on what's going on. But, you know, I actually went to college in 1995. The school I went to, 1995 was the first year they required everyone to have a computer, not a laptop, but like a desktop computer with a giant monitor that took up pretty much, you know, most of the dorm room. And I showed up, and the first thing that happened was a bunch of kids from the dorm walked in and said, "Hey, do you have the new, like, whatever it was, XP 9000? And I said, "Yeah, yes, you know, this is the computer that they made me get." And they said, "Cool, can we put it together?" I said, "Sure, you know, whatever you want to do." And these kids basically put the computer together, accessed the internet through the school network, accessed the entire school network, showed me how like the back end of software works, at least worked in 1995. And I was just really mesmerized by how the technology actually operated. And I got a business degree, but I spent a lot of time in the engineering school. And when I got done with college, PricewaterhouseCoopers had a program that basically trained you and allowed you to learn technology while consulting large businesses. And I did 2 large projects with PwC. One was with Caterpillar in Peoria, Illinois, and one was with Quaker Oats in Chicago, Illinois. And it was fascinating to really understand how these large organizations work, trying to dissect how people work together, especially when you have you know, hundreds, if not thousands of employees, and then how technology was really changing the world. And it wasn't a career that I wanted to continue or pursue, but it was something that gave me a lot of insight now in terms of how we deal with our tenants, our own employees, just how to actually get a lot done across a large scale. So it was really helpful. And, you know, the truth is, like, having a name like PwC, is somewhat of a good brand recognition. So even if you don't want the job or hate the job, having a couple of years with that brand on your resume certainly helps later on trying to get other jobs. That led me to work at they actually called it Tryon. But when I was looking for a job, I got 3 job offers. One was with Prudential, doing loans in the Midwest. One was with Enron in Houston, and one was with a small startup in New York. Truth be told, if I had known one person in Houston, Texas, I would have taken the job with Enron, because at the time Enron was like the cutting edge of what was amazing about technology, energy, you name it. And clearly that was a very lucky decision that I didn't go to Houston, Texas, and I ended up in New York. And working in a startup certainly helped me understand sort of the polar opposite of like how to be innovative with a very small team and trying to do really big things, but with sort of bootstrapping it, where everyone has to do a lot. And after that, unfortunately, 9/11 hit New York. I was in Midtown, so I was not affected personally by it. Obviously, all of us were. It was a terrible time. Tryon ended up selling our product to Reuters and FactSet. And then I applied to business school, and I was fortunate enough to get into Columbia. And while I was in Columbia, they have a great real estate department. And I decided to take some classes there, and I also needed to make a couple bucks. So my uncle allowed me to work on one of our buildings in Times Square, and I got hooked. And I haven't looked back. And it was a great experience. The funniest part about my early work experience was I went to my uncle after school and I said, hey, I want to continue doing this with you. What do you think? And he said, well, I'd like you to do that too, but what do they pay you? And I told him what an MBA from Columbia made at that time. And he says, well, we don't pay people that kind of money. And so we had to come up with a creative structure so I could at least pay my bills. Anyway, and that led me to GFP. So that's my story.
That's great. And I know that over the last your time with GFP, you've grown in the company, and a big part of it has been kind of repositioning some of the buildings. How has that been? Would you say that the challenges and what excites you about that? Bringing the buildings up, because many of these have been known like since the 50s and 60s, and you really modernized a lot of those buildings. I know it's been a big part of what you've done.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for saying that. So, being a third generation, running a third generation family business, I guess the statistic on it is that 90% fail. So I took a job where I basically have a 10% success rate. Not something I'd always recommend to people, but really, I think through the generations, one thing's been instilled upon us is that really the time to invest in a property is when it's doing really well. Obviously when it's doing poorly, you're going to have to invest. But if you continue to invest in these buildings when they're doing well, so that they're best in class, that you'll be able to survive almost any cycle. And it was something that was instilled very early on when I was working with Jeff and Eric. Jeff is my uncle and Eric is my cousin. Eric and I now run the portfolio. And Jeff had really started doing it in Soho in the 80s. I'm sure that his dad, my grandfather, had done it prior to that, but I didn't have that personal experience. And then Eric had really taken it on. And what they had been doing when I showed up was taking the old manufacturing buildings and converting them to either office or in Soho, at first it went to galleries, and then later on to creative office. And so what Eric and I did was we laid out the portfolio. We looked at the lease expirations that were coming, and we tried to get ahead of the curve way in advance of when the tenants' leases were coming up, so that by the time we had vacant space or space where we thought we could get higher rents, the building had already been improved. The lobbies had been redone. Any of the outside retail was transitioned to some sort of a restaurant or a service or an amenity that people would like, which wasn't always the easiest things. A lot of times we actually gave the space away or did some sort of percentage rent deal, whereas we could have gotten a use that wasn't necessarily a good one, but would have paid a lot more. We decided to not actually take on those uses because the front door of the building was really what was going to lead to attracting the better tenants as these neighborhoods improve. So I think, having that, laying out that plan, and then getting the backing from, not only our family, but our other partners to be able to spend the money when you really technically didn't have to, really led to the future success. And, what we do is every year we go through with our core family partners, the ones that have been around since 1958. And now it's, not just the first generation really has passed away at this point, but we have the second, third, and even fourth generation that attend these meetings. And, and you can see, we present to them now, I think it's like a 10 or 15 year look back, and you sort of see the capital being spent, and then you see the revenues rising. And I think everyone now has bought into a system where we're able to have a best in class product, which has really led to a lot of these new acquisitions.
Great. How, obviously we're in a crisis at this point. How are you, what are the measures that you're going through to help to get the portfolio through, help your tenants, and how are you coping with the downturn now?
Yeah, it's really tough. I mean, we're, for those of you that don't know us, I think we're the largest provider of small and medium-sized office space in New York City. And Bill mentioned we have roughly 2,500 companies that are in our portfolio, and 1,000 of them are not-for-profits. Starting in March, it was distress really across the board. Truthfully, like, our portfolio is built to withstand almost any kind of recession, because if you lose one tenant, two tenants, even if we lost, a lot of tenants, no building would really be affected, because we have accounting firms, lawyers, advertising, tech, you name it, every industry across the board in very small increments. And losing any one of them, or even in an industry, is something that we can certainly withstand. This was unique. All the senior members of our community, real estate community, and other that I've spoken to, say this is the worst they've ever seen. And so what we did was we sent a letter to every single tenant, and we welcomed them to call us to explore how we can help them. And we said that we would help every single organization that needed help, that could prove that they needed help. And so what we said at the bottom of the letter, we said, if you don't need help, we want you to continue to pay full rent, because you paying full rent will allow us to help those other organizations get through it. And on a case-by-case basis, we probably talked at least once, and probably multiple times, to every organization in our portfolio, and have created a plan with them to help them get through it. Now, there are some that have not made it and that won't make it through this, but I think we're probably going to walk out of this with 85 to 90% of our tenants still intact, which on a small and medium-sized business scale is pretty good results.
Yeah, and Brian, you're very active on two of the bigger bids in the city, Soho Broadway Initiative and the Downtown Alliance. How are you working with members of and businesses within the areas for those bids to kind of help them through the crisis?
I think they're very different bids. It's interesting to the good thing about, for those who don't know, the business improvement districts are typically funded by the commercial property owners, but it's required by law that the local city council person, someone from the mayor's office, I think the controller, and the borough president for that borough has to sit on the board with the community. And in Soho, I think it's one of the only bids, if not the only bid, that's actually half residential and half commercial on the board, plus the government representatives. So the Downtown Alliance is well funded. It's a very large organization. It's, I don't want to say responsible, but certainly one of the key players in rebuilding downtown after 9/11. And I think they're positioned well going into this to try to help the community and to help businesses come back as best as possible. And so they put programs together like grants. They've increased the services where the city actually pulled back services. They've been out front with trying to understand and help with the homeless crisis and come up with solutions to resolve those. even dealing with, transportation so that people can get to and fro, like especially, healthcare workers downtown. They actually run different transportation services. So it's been a pleasure to be part of it. That one is a, like PwC, like it's a large organization. So they have a lot of resources that they can use, and they've been using them, which is really nice to see. Soho is been a different experience. It's a residential community, even though it's not zone residential, that has a commercial overlay. And Soho was hit extremely hard in the early parts of the pandemic with looting. I think there was a 3-day stretch where there was 96 burglaries committed within 72 hours, which is unbelievable considering that Soho really is not a very big, land area. And we organized very quickly after that with other members of the community, and we got elected representatives from the city, the state, and on a federal level. And we actually had a meeting down in Soho right in amidst all these burglaries. And I think that meeting was what led to some of the curfew and lockdown of the city that occurred, which I think was horrifying to have happen, especially in 2020, but was necessary. And I think that actually helped sort of stabilize what was happening with this organized crime. The protests were fine, peaceful. I was there for a few of them, and I thought they went really well. It was what happened after the protests that really started to destroy the neighborhoods. And being part of these organizations, especially in Soho, I think helped the community sort of take back control and allow protests to be done, but not looting. So that's a small microcosm in terms of that world.
Yeah, it's quite a challenge. What do you see going forward? As we, hopefully we get closer to an end of the pandemic, and what do you see from the economic side for the real estate industry here in New York, and particularly within the areas where you're most heavily concentrated? What are the steps that'll kind of pull us out of here? You've been through a number of downturns. Your firms come through stronger each time. How do you do that again?
Yeah, I wish I had like the exact answer. It's a really good question. I think one that all of us grapple with. I'm sure we all have these conversations daily with what we think should be done or shouldn't be done. Right when in the midst of this, I was having like a bad week. It's been a bad year. I think my password has something to do with wanting to get to 2021 on my computer. But I called up a friend of mine who runs a large portfolio, a very large institutional portfolio, and I said, how are you guys handling this? What are you guys doing to just on morale basis, get through this? And he said that someone in the organization has circulated a lot of articles that have been written about New York City real estate right after 9/11. And he said that reading those articles gave everyone a lot of hope, because those articles said, downtown is never going to come back. No one will rent space above the 4th floor. New York City's dead. No one, live here any longer. And they were super pessimistic about the future. And obviously, New York came roaring back. Downtown is the best it's ever been. And I believe that will happen here as well. Clearly we need strong leadership, and on a state level, I think we've had it to a large extent, because this is one of the safest places probably in the world to be. The caseloads really aren't that high, even with some of these, micro outbreak areas. But the confidence, for people to go back to an office setting hasn't really materialized, and that's what we will need in order for New York City office to do better. I think one thing that I personally believe has to happen is that the government, hopefully the federal government, will indemnify companies from their employees getting sick. Because if you're a company and you're worried that your employees will sue you because they get COVID, you're likely not to bring them back for a long period of time until you feel like that litigation risk is gone. That's been discussed in Congress for the last 6 months, and hopefully some resolution that is fair back to employees. We certainly don't want them to be taken advantage of, but some indemnification is really important. Vaccine will definitely help, although it looks like, from what I understand, the success of the vaccine will only be in the 50 to maybe 70% range, which means that 30 to 50% of the people taking the vaccine won't actually have immunity from the virus. So I think keeping protections, PPE, making it mandatory or as mandatory as possible, and then this contact tracing so that people are confident that if someone gets it, it won't spread throughout the community. And I think that New Yorkers are really, and New Jersey, our tri-state region, are really doing a good job of that. And you can see that by the low cases. So as that confidence of all those things sort of comes together, hopefully, in the later part of probably 2021, people will start to, test the water and come back. And as they come back, hopefully they'll feel more confident to tell their neighbor, hey, it wasn't that bad. I didn't get sick. And we'll see that success. I think one other thing, I think the schools successfully operating will give people more confidence. That's sort of the first test. And, so far there have been cases, but it's not what it was in the spring. And I think that hopefully will lead to more confidence as next year comes around.
Great. I think it's a good time to pivot. I think, one of these things that we did talk about with this presentation was kind of bring some of the good news. And I know that you've recently completed some renovations. Over the last 5 years, you've grown the portfolio by purchase of 9 properties with over 2.3 million square feet. So I thought maybe we could get into some of the development that you're working on now. Maybe the first one to start is, and I know this is one that's near and dear to your heart, and something I had the pleasure to work on with Paul Talbot on the financing end of it, is the Film Center building at 639th. I know it was a really interesting building. I'd never seen anything like it. And I know that you did some really interesting stuff and had to get some very technical sign-offs from the city to get that building redone, but the result has really been spectacular. So maybe you could talk a little bit on that one.
Yeah, thank you. That was a fun project. It took a lot of creativity, and we had a great team, including yourself, to try to figure that out. So if you don't know the building, it's on 9th Avenue between 44th and 45th Street, and the building the architect was a guy named Eli Jacques Kahn. And if you don't know Eli Jacques Kahn, certainly Google him and see the works that he did. It's very unique architecture. He was really in the teens and the 1920s was when he was in his prime, and he created this. He sort of had his own spin and unique look to Art Deco architecture. And we actually have people that show up in our lobby, because our lobby is landmark. It's not the entire building, just the lobby, because of his design. So we have architecture students and just sort of people who love history that show up regularly to take photographs of it. So the building was purpose built as a film building. So what they did was they actually stored film, like the old reels, and that is made of it's called nitrate film, which is extremely flammable. So what they had to do is they developed these storage units for the nitrate film that they could lock them in, and each of them was like its own vault that could be locked and had like a fuse in case something was lit, and had significant sprinklers, and they all had their own independent shaftway. So if something caught fire, the smoke would go up this shaftway, and it wouldn't affect any of the other film vaults. And all of the major movie production companies basically had space in this building. It was the film building, and it was Columbia Pictures and Fox, and all these different organizations. So clearly that industry is gone. We don't use nitrate film, and we had like a significant amount of these vaults. And if you can imagine on the 14th floor, the top floor of the building, because all of the shaftways from the 2nd floor, 3rd floor, 4th floor were all there. The 14th floor, like half the floor was like basically chimneys, and you couldn't use the space. And the entire back of the building was also just brick, because it was just where all the chimneys were. So we tried to figure out, would the city allow us to remove the chimneys, which technically you're not allowed to actually use them as FAR, and then convert it to FAR. And we spent a lot of time at actually Columbia University in the vaults, pulling all the original documents out, and a lot of time with the building department trying to study it and understand, like from a legal perspective, we didn't want to set a precedent to then allow, other buildings to do something, take advantage of this, but we wanted to basically be able to use our building again. And the city allowed us to restore the FAR. And then we said to them, well, that's great, we're going to restore this FAR, but we have no windows. And the problem was all the buildings next to us were not fireproof buildings. And there was a concern that if there ever was a fire in our building, that it would spread to those buildings and then destroy all the buildings on the block. And so we had to actually create a fire suppression system from our building that would actually put out the building next to us in case there was a fire. And so we actually use all those excess sprinklers that we had from all the vaults to basically line the back of our building with sprinklers. And we had to get the fire department to sign off on this project. And then once we did that, we were allowed to actually install windows and remove all the brick. And we had literally workers that would be suspended from the roof of our building, removing all the brick and then installing windows and installing the fire suppression system. So it was fascinating to see how partnership with local government, you know, and expertise of like a lot of different people that sort of understand all these different angles allowed us to create kind of a unique product. And it really is, you know, beautiful. The views are outstanding, and the building next door is even safer.
That's great. Moving to a couple of deals that you're in the works right now that, you know, right through COVID you're working on. So, you know, can you talk a little bit about 100 Pearl Street, which, you know, this was the old Guardian Life Insurance headquarters, and, you know, you're kind of bringing an old building back to life. Can you know, major redesign and additions to the property. Can you talk a little bit about that and how the work has been impacted by the crisis?
Sure. Yeah. So, you know, all of the deals that we do have some sort of a unique angle to them. We rarely buy something that's a marketed deal because we don't think that we'll have, unless we think we have some sort of an advantage over the other, you know, buyers. In this particular building, it was interesting because Guardian had a right to actually buy the fee interest of this building, and they were worried that if they exercised the right to buy it, which they had to do 2 years before their lease ended, that something would happen. And, you know, I don't think they were predicting COVID, but, you know, it was you know, close. So they decided that they wanted to actually sell almost their right, but 2 years in advance. And what happened in this deal as a result is that there's very few institutions that will sign a forward contract, especially one that's, you know, 2 years in advance. And there's very few, you know, entrepreneurial buyers that can buy a 1 million square foot office building. And, you know, very few of the families are willing to take that kind of risk as well. So what ended up happening was that they had a limited amount of demand. So it was a marketed deal, and Cushman did a great job in their process, but because there were just so few that could actually transact in that way, we were able to craft a deal with Guardian that gave us, I think, an advantage in that process. We also were fortunate to work with a great team at Newmark that was representing New York City Health and Hospitals. And so we convinced them, and I think it was really a partnership, because New York City Health and Hospitals was looking to create a headquarters campus. And they had some space across the street at 55 Water. We created a separate entrance for them at 50 Water Street. And instead of having the building's entrance with a 7 Hanover address, now we have 2. One is 50 Water Street for Health and Hospitals on the bottom half of the building. And we actually renamed the building 100 Pearl Street, and the another entranceway on Pearl Street. What's interesting during the pandemic is, you know, because we're building space for New York City Health and Hospitals, I think we had roughly a 1 month delay in construction. And I think we might have had 1 case of COVID at the project, but because it was New York City Health and Hospitals, it was declared an essential project, and we were able to resume construction. And we have a significant like check-in process that, you know, basically allows us to screen anyone that has had contact or has contracted COVID. And since I think that 1 case we have, you know, knock on wood, we haven't had another one. And we have 3 other major projects that are going on. And through that screening process or similar processes, we've been able to, I think, keep the workers safe and healthy. Another interesting thing, which I think gives us some hope going forward is New York City Health and Hospitals are building their headquarters. They obviously know a lot about what's going on with COVID and healthcare, and their design for the space hasn't really changed much. And I think it just tells you that this virus won't be here forever, right? It is something that is here. It's very serious, and we have to take it that way. But eventually, it will be gone, and we need to plan for the short run to get through it. But we shouldn't think that this is the way life will be forever. And I look back to their plans, and it gives me confidence about the future.
Yeah, Brian, another project you're working on is over on 4518 Court Square, the Innolabs project. Now, the thing that's really interesting there is your group was one of the first groups to go into Long Island City. That's now broadly seen as a really important cluster that's developing in the life science industry. Life science is an industry that's really held up and really kind of got stronger through COVID. Because it's one of the few asset classes that's still doing really well. What enabled you to kind of be out on the pioneering edge there and get into Long Island City before other groups? Now there's Alexandria came in similar timing as you. Botanic just did a deal, and I know that just about every site that pops up, especially around that core, is now a life science site and is getting interest. Some of these big groups. Similar to your partner King Street coming down from Boston, they're all looking for places to develop in Long Island City. So can you give us a little background on what made you make that move and be one of the early movers there?
Sure. Yeah, it's if you ask me, prior to that project, if I ever thought we would build a spec building, I would have told you you'd be out of your mind. It wouldn't be something that we would want to take on. So what happened was we've been investing in Long Island City for the last decade and trying to buy up either sites that we thought would be good future development sites or ones that we could convert to less expensive office product. Because what we saw in Manhattan was the pricing was getting so expensive that a lot of our small and medium-sized companies couldn't afford to be in Manhattan. And so as we were doing that, we had these buildings, and we started to get approached by life science companies and asking if we had space for them. And we didn't know much about it. We said, all right, well, this is interesting. Like, rarely are we approached by a totally different industry, at that level. And so we started to call life science developers, and we found King Street, who's one of the largest in the country, and I think the largest in Cambridge, and had them come down to New York. They had already been interested in expanding into New York. And we spent a lot of time learning about the industry and why it has become successful in these other areas of the country. And what we learned in New York City is that whatever life science, and when I say life science, I mean purpose-built life science. So it's not just saying, hey, we're going to do life science and find the tenant and we'll just do something to do that later. It's actually building a building that is a life science building, not an office building that's just got a little bit of a souped-up air conditioning system. We learned that any building in New York City that had been built as a purpose-built life science building had been leased up immediately. And that they were carrying rents that were, significantly higher than the market. I mean, $110 plus triple net rents. And so we're sitting there saying, all right, well, on the one hand, we have all these tenants that are trying to find space, and there's not space for them in the existing stock. And on the other hand, every building that's ever been built that way has been leased up and has been extremely successful. And then, simultaneously, we knew some sites that we thought were good development sites for the project. And the city also came out with an RFEI for incentives to do a life science deal. So that all of those things together, and the fact that we had a site that we thought was actually very good for it, allowed us to make that decision to push forward. And what's happened as a result is that we have a building that I think will deliver in the second quarter of 2021. That'll be a purpose-built, all of the systems that you can think of in terms of the air conditioning, the generator capacity, the chemical storage, the chemical disposal, the loading, like all the things that no one, I didn't know about before embarking on this process that we'll have in place. And we had, term sheets and paper out that should fill a significant amount of it even before we finished the project. I'm certainly curious because since we embarked on it, and on that RFEI, we were one of 2 organizations to win the bid and get the incentives from the city that helps us draw more of these companies from outside of New York to New York. So I'm curious to see, I think our project will be successful because it is purpose-built. It is going to be one of the best, if not the best facilities in Long Island City and in the New York area. And I'm curious to see how the other projects, especially the ones that aren't going to the same level that we are, and how successful they are. So time will tell, but I'm excited about this project.
Great. Before we move to Q&A, is there, where do you see the next big opportunity? Like, what are you looking at? I know a lot of attention's on kind of getting through the crisis, but over the years, one of the things that GFP has really been able to take advantage of some of these situations and grow and improve through these crises. Where do you think the next step forward is?
It's a question that we spend a lot of time on. Like I said, every one of our deals is unique, and it has some sort of an angle. We rarely say, okay, this is our program, and we're just going to repeat the program over and over again. I understand a lot of organizations do that. It's not what we're necessarily about. If I was not working at GFP and I was in like a private equity shop, I'd be spending a lot of time on hotels, on condo inventory, on debt, especially mezzanine, the BC tranches. I think the opportunity there is going to be really significant over the next year or two. From a GFP perspective, I think we're searching out these unique opportunities. We've actually bought some industrial, and we did it pre-COVID, like right before COVID. We saw how the demand was increasing. We have not that it's been a primary part of our business, but we had a couple of industrial properties where we had a vacancy, and we had 3 tenants show up within like a day of learning of it, and we could lease the space that quickly. That showed us there's something there. I think student housing makes a lot of sense. It's interesting to see how the universities, the ones that have done it and have been sort of ahead of the curve, are able to deliver a product to their students that's less expensive than any housing they could find, that has more amenities and is of higher quality than anything else their students could find in the area. And so it's a great deal for the students, and the universities can actually make money on the product. So everyone wins through the cycle. And there's so many universities in New York that haven't done that yet. So we're hoping to be able to explain that to those organizations. And I'm, not that I'm hoping for distress, but we're certainly hoping for opportunities in the office market. That's really our bread and butter, and we'll see how sort of things pencil out.
Do you see any opportunities going outside of the city, either to the suburbs or further afield? Is that something you see, or are you sticking to the core?
So the reason we've been buying in Long Island City and in Brooklyn, we own projects in Jersey City as well, is because we do think that those surrounding areas will have more demand than they've had in the past. And I think pre-COVID, we certainly saw that. And I think that will return. I think going further than that, like all the times, and we've been in business for a long time. So every time, and everyone in each generation of our family has tried going out into suburban markets, and we've done work in other states as well. And every time we've done it, it hasn't been as successful as being in New York City. And there's various reasons for it. But the primary reason is the demand hasn't, if it's been there, then the supply has increased to match the demand, right? Because it's easier to build in these other areas. And then in the areas where the demand hasn't been there, well, the demand hasn't been there. So it's difficult to really own a product where you really rely entirely on being able to rent it and having demand that's there. And so I'm cautious about that. Each of these cycles where things have occurred, which have driven people outside of New York, it's been corrected and resolved, and people have come back to the city. And it's not just New York City. If you study large cities, A cities, gateway cities, for the last, 200 years, probably even longer, they've just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and more popular and more popular and more popular. And it's because people want to be with people. They don't want to be isolated. So certainly in your mind, you're like, I wouldn't like mind living in the forest and having my own property. But in reality, most people want to be with each other. And so I think that trend will be disrupted for certainly this year, for next year, maybe the year after. But I think that comes back. And I think that is the path that the human race has been on will continue.
Great. Hey, we have a question here from one of our students. Do you appreciated kind of your discussion earlier in the seminar about your career path? Do you have some advice for some of the students getting going in their career? Some of these, it's obviously rough times, but some advice for those people would be helpful.
Yeah. So I'll say the same thing that I say to every single person that asked me that question. And I learned it from one of my best friends that I grew up with. And what he did and what he's done, and it's really incredible, is he's kept track of like pretty much everyone he's ever met. He was like doing LinkedIn before LinkedIn was a thing. And what he does is he tries to keep up with them in some way or another. And the thing that I use is there's these like Google alerts. If you guys haven't done it, you can actually tell Google, you can type someone's name in or their organization or something they're doing. And every time it pops up in any kind of media, Google will send you a note. And they can send it to you every day. They can send it to every week. And what I advise you to do is every time you meet someone, especially in an industry that you're interested in, is you set up an alert. And it's not like a stalking thing, but what you're trying to do is you just want to keep up with what's happening. And if you see them in something, send them a note saying, hey, how's it going? I saw you did this. That's really interesting. Here's what I'm doing. And if there's something that you're actually trying to do, you can say, I'm really trying to do this. And can you, I see that whatever, would you mind introducing me? And if you see that they're trying to do something, trying to help them, and by you helping them, keeping in touch, and them, they'll probably want to help you. Most people do want to help other people, and you'll build your network. And what happens as you build your network is opportunities just come. And it's a bizarre thing. When you look back, it makes total sense. The path that you've taken in your life makes sense. But looking forward, obviously, it's very hazy and difficult to discern. But the more people you're in touch with, the more that they see that you're genuinely interested in them and trying to help them out, the more they'll help you out, and the more those opportunities will show up. So I'd certainly do that. And then the other thing is, when you are in an interview with someone, or you're talking to someone on the phone or on a Zoom call, I would ask them if there's anyone else that they know that they think you should talk to. And that way you're not actually having to, you're getting a warm introduction versus a cold introduction to people. That person will, as a friend, will reach out to their friend saying, hey, I met this person that's interested in this. They seem smart. Would you mind spending 15 minutes with them? And I think that will help you in your career. If you can do it, I think you'll be incredibly successful. It is difficult though, because it takes a lot of time.
Great. We have a few more questions. What's the percentage of your commercial tenants who are reoccupying now, coming during the pandemic? What's the general occupancy of the building?
Yeah, it's a good question. So you guys are smart. So the difficulty is trying to figure out what the denominator is for the percentage. The numerator is easy. So the denominator that I like to use is, if you took our day that had the most occupancy, like the most people that showed up pre-COVID, and you use that as the denominator, and then you look at the numerator. Right now we're probably in the 15% range, and it just depends on the building. Back in August, we were probably in the 8 to 10% range. So it's creeping up slowly, but it's really a slow creep. And then clearly what's happening is Mondays and Fridays there's much lower occupancy, and Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday has higher occupancy. But it depends on the tenant. There are some tenants that have been in occupancy straight through the entire pandemic. They never really stopped, unless they had someone who was more susceptible.
Great. And next question. Do you think that the post-COVID, the leasing prices for office space in your city will be permanently or mid to long-term affected given the ability of companies to adapt with Zoom and other technologies? I'm sure you've heard this one a few times.
Yeah, it's a good question. So my cousin, he has a good way to put this. He says, you know, working from home is not like some new invention. Like that's been around for a very long time, you know, but employers allowing the people to work from home is what's the new thing today. And so I think, you know, the question will be back to what I'd said before. If employers feel that their liability is really high, it will continue for some time. I think if they think their liability is low, that they'll probably stop allowing people to work from home, because all the studies we see, they show that people are working longer hours from home because they're not commuting. But what they're also showing is that the people aren't actually working the entire time. They're doing some sort of recreation for themselves. They're doing something with their kids. They're, you know, doing an errand. They're fixing something in the house. Like their productivity, even though they have longer hours, is actually lower. And I think that is not a good recipe, not just for employers, but for employees as well. And I do think that it'll return. So as the demand, and our business is really simple. It's just supply and demand. It's the first day of economics, just matching the curve of supply and demand. And I think as that demand returns, that the pricing will ratchet back up. And in the meantime, it's going to be really challenging until companies feel that they should be in space, so they can put their employees in space. I think that the pricing will be very challenged.
Okay, great. I think Neil Matson has a couple questions for you too as well.
Sure do. And thank you both, Bill and Brian, for a fascinating conversation. Something that comes to my mind is, how does an organization like GFP capitalize its deals? You know, obviously, it's been in business for a long time, so maybe the answer is we use all family money and we use all equity, and that's all there is to it. Maybe there's a combination of debt and equity, and if so, where does the equity come from? Is it all family money, or do you partner with individuals?
It's a great question. On the Garau family side, we have a pool of capital that our family is basically committed to continuing to reinvest. And I think we made a decision a long time ago that look, in order for our family to actually stick together, we need to continue to invest, because let's face it, the more kids everyone has, the more grandkids they have, the more that funding is dispersed. So unless you continue to grow the funding, at some point the checks that everyone's getting won't be sufficient, and they're going to not want to continue. They're going to probably want to sell, which is typically what happens with real estate families. So at the same time, we also have this extended group that's been investing with our family for a very long time, like partners of my grandfathers, and then partners of my uncles that have joined us, and partners of ours, and their families and their family trusts have basically said to us, we want you to continue what we're doing, and we're committed to you doing it. And we have conversations regularly about what kind of capital they're willing to invest, so that we have a good understanding of what we can actually buy. And then there's another group of friends and family that have asked us over the years to invest. So we keep a pretty detailed, list of our investors, and we check in with them regularly to see if they're interested in active deal flow. That being said, you know, the size of transactions, at least pre-COVID, has grown to the point where for us to do them, like buying a 1 million square foot office building in New York City, even though we think we bought it very well, required $200 million of equity. So in that deal, for example, we were able to capitalize it with roughly half equity from our family and our friends and family group. And then we brought in an institutional partner for the other half. And I think having the institutional capital, it helps in a number of ways for us. One is, you know, it provides us like a bridge in some respect. It's I don't want to say it's like borrowing money, but it is in some respect a bridge to get from redevelopment to stabilization, and they're taking a sizable risk. So for our investors who want to take some risk but not all the risk, it allows them to shed some of the risk for that group. But look, let's face it, they also have a significant expertise, connections, contacts. So each of the last, I think, 5 deals we've done, we've had an institutional partner, a different institutional partner in all of them, and each of them has brought, I think, a lot to the table. So, you know, the larger deals we're capitalizing, let's say half friends and family, half institution, and then the smaller deals, when we do get like into sort of like a medium-sized Manhattan transaction, we will try to just capitalize it just friends and family. But those transactions tend not to be as risky. So I think the family tends to be more comfortable on that risk spectrum.
How about on the debt side?
You know, it depends what kind of a deal. So a life science deal is unique. It's not like a large pool of lenders that understand the space and are willing to take on that kind of risk. But we use firms like Newmark, you know, or Cushman or other providers to actually, you know, source debt from the lenders that have specialties in that area, and, you know, trying to create a competitive process. But for our core portfolio, we have a stable of lenders that we've used for years. They do come in and out of vogue. It's interesting, like lenders have programs, and if you catch the lender in the right program, you can get very attractive pricing. And then sometimes they move out of the program, so you need to have, you know, a number of lenders. I think we probably have like 8 regular lenders that we sort of are rotating through, and we try to have direct, deep relationships like throughout their organization, from the person who's dealing with our controller, you know, all the way up to, you know, potentially the C-suite, so that we can have conversations when necessary. And, you know, hopefully they're not necessary, but when necessary. And it's much better, obviously, to work with people, even if they're large organizations, but being able to have direct contact with people versus the CMBS market. We have used the CMBS market, but it's something that we try to avoid if possible, because even if you think it's a stable deal, if anything does come up down the road, it's just such a pain in the butt to get someone on the phone. And even if you find someone, and they're usually all highly intelligent, they understand it, they just don't have the ability to do something. It's like, it's asking them, you know, they have like a machine that makes, you know, maple syrup, and you're asking them to make ketchup, and they just can't do it. And then, you know, finally, we actually have used the CTL market, which is a market that's sort of interesting. For those that you don't know, when you have a credit tenant, you know, there's another type of like insurance product where the insurance companies try to match with their insurance policies, you know, a debt product, but it almost like is irrelevant to the actual real estate. So it's less of a real estate product, but more of a debt product. And we know we're fortunate to have some credit tenants, and matching those together makes sense, especially if you're long-term planning, you know, for a family. I don't know if that helps you.
Absolutely, thank you. And what about opportunity zones? Those, you know, got a lot of attention when they were, you know, a newly introduced component of the Tax Act a few years ago. Have you investigated any of those, and do you see opportunities there? So
we're real estate investors first, and then we're, I guess, capital allocators like second. So you know, in our checklist, when we're doing our diligence, you know, one of the first things we're looking at is it an opportunity zone? Because there certainly is a significant incentive to try to do a deal in those areas. But we're more looking at the real estate deal than just saying, okay, here's an opportunity zone, just spend time in that zone. We've had a handful of possible ones, but we haven't had ones that we pulled the trigger on. Yeah, I just don't. To me, and I think this might be, you know, just I guess an inability on our part and something that we need to overcome. It just doesn't seem right to say, hey, we're going to do a deal in this area because there's some incentive on the capital, and it really doesn't matter how well the real estate performs. Like, it just that doesn't feel right to us, and we haven't really pursued that type of transaction. But we'd love to, because it's a great program if you can find the right real estate deal.
Yep.
Great. Thanks, Brian. We're bumping up on 9:30, so we've taken enough of your time, and we really appreciate you coming in and speaking with us. I think this was a very informative discussion, and really some insight into one of New York's really quiet giants in the real estate. So with things that you're doing and the growth that you've had lately is really exciting. So thanks again, and I'll turn it over to Andy to close our program.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. That was a really interesting discussion, and I know I learned a lot. Thank you to our whole crew here in putting everything together, and Will and Brian. That was really wonderful. So everybody have a great morning. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Great.